There is no fundamental difference between humans and the higher mammals and their mental faculties. It is always advisable to perceive clearly our ignorance. We are optimists until we are not. The willing horse is always overworked. Why, if species have descended from other species by insensibly fine gradations, do we not everywhere see innumerable transitional forms? Great is the power of steady misrepresentation, but the history of science shows that fortunately this power does not long endure. If the misery of the poor be caused not by the laws of nature, but by our institutions, great is our sin. I have called this principle, by which each slight variation, if useful, is preserved, by the term of natural selection. For the shield may be as important for victory, as the sword or spear. We behold the face of nature bright with gladness. Wherever the European has trod, death seems to pursue the aboriginal. Not one living species will transmit its unaltered likeness to a distant futurity. The very essence of instinct is that it's followed independently of reason. I have tried lately to read Shakespeare, and found it so intolerably dull that it nauseated me. How paramount the future is to the present when one is surrounded by children. Blushing is the most peculiar and most human of all expressions. The most important factor in survival is neither intelligence nor strength but adaptability. The love for all living creatures is the most noble attribute of man. The world will not be inherited by the strongest, it will be inherited by those most able to change. Nothing exists for itself alone, but only in relation to other forms of life. It is not the biggest, the brightest, or the best that will survive, but those who adapt the quickest. Building a better mousetrap merely results in smarter mice. A man who dares to waste 1 hour of time has not discovered the value of life. Some call it evolution, and others call it God. The more one thinks, the more one feels the hopeless immensity of man's ignorance. Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. In the long history of humankind, and animal kind, too, those who learn to collaborate and improvise most effectively have prevailed. Intelligence is based on how efficient a species became at doing the things they need to survive. We are always slow in admitting any great change of which we do not see the intermediate steps. It is impossible to conceive of this immense and wonderful universe as the result of blind chance or necessity. On the ordinary view of each species having been independently created, we gain no scientific explanation. Everything in nature is the result of fixed laws. Much love, much trial, but what an utter desert is life without love. Free will is to mind what chance is to matter. There is no fundamental difference between men and animals in their ability to feel pleasure and pain, happiness and misery. It is a cursed evil to any man to become as absorbed in any subject as I am in mine. Even people who aren't geniuses can outthink the rest of mankind if they develop certain thinking habits. Only the fittest will survive. The highest possible stage in moral culture is when we recognize that we ought to control our thoughts. I never gave up Christianity until I was 40 years of age. If everyone were cast in the same mold, there would be no such thing as beauty. I am dying by inches, from not having anybody to talk to about insects. I am not apt to follow blindly the lead of other men. Not one change of species into another is on record. We cannot prove that a single species has been changed. We are not here concerned with hopes or fears, only with truth as far as our reason permits us to discover it. Freedom of thought is best promoted by the gradual illumination of men's minds which follows from the advance of science. An agnostic would be the more correct description of my state of mind. Often a cold shudder has run through me, and I have asked myself whether I may have not devoted myself to a fantasy. Such simple instincts as bees making a beehive could be sufficient to overthrow my whole theory. An American monkey, after getting drunk on brandy, would never touch it again, and thus is much wiser than most men. The mystery of the beginning of all things is insoluble by us, and I for one must be content to remain an agnostic. A mathematician is a blind man in a dark room looking for a black cat which isn't there. Animals, whom we have made our slaves, we do not like to consider our equal. Man is descended from a hairy, tailed quadruped, probably arboreal in its habits. A man's friendships are one of the best measures of his worth. To kill an error is as good a service as, and sometimes even better than, the establishing of a new truth or fact. It's not the strongest, but the most adaptable that survive. Great is the power of steady misrepresentation. In the struggle for survival, the fittest win out at the expense of their rivals because they succeed in adapting themselves best to their environment. Even the humblest mammal's strong sexual, parental, and social instincts give rise to "do unto others as yourself" and "love thy neighbor as thyself." The moral faculties are generally and justly esteemed as of higher value than the intellectual powers. To suppose that the eye could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest possible degree. Nothing can be more improving to a young naturalist than a journey in a distant country. Light may be shed on man and his origins. I have no great quickness of apprehension or wit which is so remarkable in some clever men, for instance Huxley. The normal food of man is vegetable. Besides love and sympathy, animals exhibit other qualities connected with the social instincts which in us would be called moral. I ought, or I ought not, constitute the whole of morality. One hand has surely worked throughout the universe. Man, wonderful man, must collapse into nature's cauldron. He is no deity, he is no exception. At no time am I a quick thinker or writer. Whatever I have done in science has solely been by long pondering, patience and industry. Language is an art, like brewing or baking. It certainly is not a true instinct, for every language has to be learnt. A fair result can be obtained only by fully stating and balancing the facts and arguments on both sides of each question. Charles Darwin. The most energetic workers I have encountered in my world travels are the vegetarian miners of Chile. I am almost convinced, quite contrary to opinion I started with, that species are not, it is like confessing a murder, immutable. What wretched doings come from the ardor of fame, the love of truth alone would never make one man attack another bitterly. The formation of different languages and of distinct species and the proofs that both have been developed through a gradual process are curiously parallel. As natural selection works solely by and for the good of each being, all corporeal and mental endowments will tend to progress toward perfection. Thus we have given to men a pedigree of prodigious length, but not, it may be said, of noble quality. The most powerful natural species are those that adapt to environmental change without losing their fundamental identity, which gives them their competitive advantage. Only picture to yourself a nice soft wife on a sofa with good fire, and books and music. A language, like a species, when extinct, never reappears. There is a grandeur in this view of life. From so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful are being evolved. One general law, leading to the advancement of all organic beings, namely, multiply, vary, let the strongest live and the weakest die. From my early youth I have had the strongest desire to understand or explain whatever I observed. To group all facts under some general laws. I would give absolutely nothing for the theory of natural selection, if it requires miraculous additions at any one stage of descent. Probably all the organic beings which have ever lived on this earth have descended from some one primordial form, into which life was first breathed. It is mere rubbish thinking, at present, of origin of life. One might as well think of origin of matter. I have at least, as I hope, done good service in aiding to overthrow the dogma of separate creations. He who remains passive when overwhelmed with grief loses his best chance of recovering his elasticity of mind. Sympathy beyond the confines of men, that is, humanity to the lower animals, seems to be one of the latest moral acquisitions. What a book a devil's chaplain might write on the clumsy, wasteful, blundering, low, and horribly cruel work of nature. Music was known and understood before words were spoken. Mere chance alone would never account for so habitual and large an amount of difference as that between varieties of the same species. He who understands baboon would do more towards metaphysics than Locke. Hence, a traveler should be a botanist, for in all views plants form the chief embellishment. Attention, if sudden and close, graduates into surprise, and this into astonishment, and this into stupefied amazement. Worms have played a more important part in the history of the world than humans would at first suppose. Disbelief crept over me at a very slow rate, but at last it was complete. My mind seems to have become a kind of machine for grinding general laws out of large collections of facts. Man selects only for his own good, nature only for that of the being which she tends. It is like confessing to a murder. Multiply, vary, let the strongest live and the weakest die. As for a future life, every man must judge for himself between conflicting vague probabilities. Endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been, and are being evolved. We have happy days, remember good dinners. Sympathy for the lowest animals is one of the noblest virtues with which man is endowed. All nature is perverse and will not do as I wish it. It may be doubted whether any character can be named which is distinctive of a race and is constant. Progress has been much more general than retrogression. I long to set foot where no man has trod before. I cannot persuade myself that a beneficent and omnipotent God would have designedly created that a cat should play with mice. The main conclusion here arrived at is that man is descended from some less highly organized form. It is a fatal fault to reason whilst observing, though so necessary beforehand and so useful afterwards. Our faculties are more fitted to recognize the wonderful structure of a beetle than a universe. It may be conceit, but I believe the subject will interest the public, and I am sure that the views are original. The survival or preservation of certain favored words in the struggle for existence is natural selection. We will now discuss in a little more detail the struggle for existence. Although much remains obscure, and will long remain obscure, I am convinced that natural selection has been the main but not exclusive means of modification. It at once struck me that under these circumstances favorable variations would tend to be preserved, and unfavorable ones to be destroyed. Mathematics seems to endow one with something like a new sense. I agree with Agassiz that dogs possess something very like conscience. It is scarcely possible to doubt that the love of men has become instinctive in the dog. Man tends to increase at a greater rate than his means of subsistence. I cannot see evidence of design and beneficence. There seems to me too much misery in the world. Alexander von Humboldt was the greatest scientific traveler who ever lived. The instruction at Edinburgh was altogether by lectures, and these were intolerably dull, with the exception of those on chemistry. He young and the old of widely different races, both with men and animals, express the same state of mind by the same movements. Our descent, then, is the origin of our evil passions. The devil under form of baboon is our grandfather. A scientific man ought to have no wishes, no affections, a mere heart of stone. A cell is a complex structure, with its investing membrane, nucleus, and nucleolus. The school as a means of education to me was simply a blank. Many kinds of monkeys have a strong taste for tea, coffee, and spirituous liqueurs. If man had not been his own classifier, he would never have thought of founding a separate order for his own reception. Life is nearly over with me. I have taken no pains about my style of writing. The man who walks with Henslow. Sympathy will have been increased through natural selection. Animals manifestly enjoy excitement, and suffer from a null and may exhibit curiosity. I worked on true Baconian principles, and without any theory collected facts. Man is developed from an ovule, about 1/125th of an inch in diameter, which differs in no respect from the ovules of other animals. In the survival of favored individuals and races, during the constantly recurring struggle for existence, we see a powerful and ever-acting form of selection. Linnaeus and Cuvier have been my two gods, though in very different ways, but they were mere schoolboys to old Aristotle. Conscience looks backwards and judges past actions, inducing that kind of dissatisfaction, which if weak we call regret, and if severe remorse. The expression often used by Mr. Herbert Spencer of the survival of the fittest is more accurate, and is sometimes equally convenient. The age-old and noble thought of, I will lay down my life to save another, is nothing more than cowardice. I have long discovered that geologists never read each other's works, and that the only object in writing a book is a proof of earnestness. I love fools' experiments. I am always making them. In my simplicity, I remember wondering why every gentleman did not become an ornithologist. If I had not been so great an invalid, I should not have done so much as I have accomplished. A republic cannot succeed till it contains a certain body of men imbued with the principles of justice and honor. I always make special notes about evidence that contradicts me, supportive evidence I can remember without trying. The season of love is that of battle. The roots of these fights run deep. On your life, underestimating the proclivities of finches is likely to lead to great internal hemorrhaging. I feel like an old warhorse at the sound of a trumpet when I read about the capturing of rare beetles. I am turned into a sort of machine for observing facts and grinding out conclusions. Every new body of discovery is mathematical in form, because there is no other guidance we can have. With mammals, the male appears to win the female much more through the law of battle than through the display of his charms. I am a firm believer that without speculation there is no good and original observation. Light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history. And hail their queen, fair regent of the night. I hate a barnacle as no man ever did before, not even a sailor in a slow-sailing ship. We fancied even that the bushes smelt unpleasantly. Farewell, Australia. You are too great and ambitious for affection, yet not great enough for respect. I leave your shores without sorrow or regret. Anyone whose disposition leads him to attach more weight to unexplained difficulties than to the explanation of facts will certainly reject my theory. Nature will tell you a direct lie if she can. I can remember the very spot in the road, whilst in my carriage, when to my joy the solution occurred to me. Thomson's views on the recent age of the world have been for some time one of my sorest troubles. I am not the least afraid to die. The Times is getting more detestable, but that is too weak word, than ever. Delight itself, however, is a weak term to express the feelings of a naturalist. I see no good reasons why the views given in this volume should shock the religious views of anyone. On your life, underestimating the proclivities of finches is likely to lead to great internal hemorrhaging. I feel like an old warhorse at the sound of a trumpet when I read about the capturing of rare beetles. I am turned into a sort of machine for observing facts and grinding out conclusions. Every new body of discovery is mathematical in form, because there is no other guidance we can have. With mammals, the male appears to win the female much more through the law of battle than through the display of his charms. I am a firm believer that without speculation there is no good and original observation. Light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history. And hail their queen, fair regent of the night. I hate a barnacle as no man ever did before, not even a sailor in a slow-sailing ship. We fancied even that the bushes smelt unpleasantly. On your life, underestimating the proclivities of finches is likely to lead to great internal hemorrhaging. I feel like an old warhorse at the sound of a trumpet when I read about the capturing of rare beetles. I am turned into a sort of machine for observing facts and grinding out conclusions. Every new body of discovery is mathematical in form, because there is no other guidance we can have. With mammals, the male appears to win the female much more through the law of battle than through the display of his charms. I am a firm believer that without speculation there is no good and original observation. Light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history. And hail their queen, fair regent of the night. I hate a barnacle as no man ever did before, not even a sailor in a slow-sailing ship. We fancied even that the bushes smelt unpleasantly. On your life, underestimating the proclivities of finches is likely to lead to great internal hemorrhaging. I feel like an old warhorse at the sound of a trumpet when I read about the capturing of rare beetles. I am turned into a sort of machine for observing facts and grinding out conclusions. Every new body of discovery is mathematical in form, because there is no other guidance we can have. With mammals, the male appears to win the female much more through the law of battle than through the display of his charms. I am a firm believer that without speculation there is no good and original observation. Light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history. And hail their queen, fair regent of the night. I hate a barnacle as no man ever did before, not even a sailor in a slow-sailing ship. We fancied even that the bushes smelt unpleasantly. On your life, underestimating the proclivities of finches is likely to lead to great internal hemorrhaging. I feel like an old warhorse at the sound of a trumpet when I read about the capturing of rare beetles. I am turned into a sort of machine for observing facts and grinding out conclusions. Every new body of discovery is mathematical in form, because there is no other guidance we can have. With mammals, the male appears to win the female much more through the law of battle than through the display of his charms. I am a firm believer that without speculation there is no good and original observation. Light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history. And hail their queen, fair regent of the night. I hate a barnacle as no man ever did before, not even a sailor in a slow-sailing ship. We fancied even that the bushes smelt unpleasantly.